Good morning. We are pleased to host this discussion about choice, about the choice and the right of Solterra residents to have a choice on new taxes. This is a controversial issue, as are most issues involving taxes. But the issue is not personal. It's not about us. It's not about our FRMD board members, who we sincerely thank for their dedicated service to our community. Anticipating that we will hear differing opinions tonight, we ask that the discussion be respectful and courteous, keeping in mind that we all want what is best for our community. Our plan is to conclude the meeting in 1 hour. You will have the opportunity to ask questions at the conclusion of each speaker's 10-minute presentation, and again at the end of the evening, or the end of the morning session. Our presenters are John Henderson and Gary Grieser. The Solterra Community Network was formed with one purpose: to get our right to vote on community debt reinstated. There are certainly many ways to accomplish this goal. At this time, with the board's refusal to put the issue to a vote of the community, their recent decision to issue new bonds, and their refusal to verify the actual amount of money we owe to Brookfield, we feel that a recall of the board members is our only option. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce our network members. Victoria Hudson is a fifth-generation Colorado native who loves living in Solterra and has been here 5 years. Currently a full-time volunteer, she spent many years as the assistant to a senior partner in the litigation department of the law firm Holland & Hart. J.D. LeBou is a professional mental health counselor and an Agile coach. He's a concerned Solterra resident who does not want us to follow unreasonable contracts and agreements. Paul Tesser has worked as an IT professional for 40 years before retiring and moving to Solterra in 2014. In his most recent positions, he served as Geographic Data Administrator for the City and County of Denver and CDOT. He also served as President of the Walnut Hills Civic Association. Dr. Alex Ufa is a theoretical physicist. He got involved in special district abuse issues after seeing developers abuse the system for personal gain. Being a first-generation immigrant from a country where people's voices are suppressed or bought, he has firsthand knowledge of how devastating such practices are. I'm Linnea Hauser. I have a master's degree in leadership, and I spent the last 30 years of my career in higher ed administration, most recently at DU. Don Henderson has a master's in public administration and is a lawyer. During the past 36 years as an attorney, he represented developers and residents. For 40 years, he has advocated for residents on land use issues in 4 states with no compensation. He has served as an officer and president for 2 HOAs in Virginia and Kansas. The past 3.5 years, he has advocated for Metro District reform in Colorado and has become recognized as an expert on Metro Districts by the Denver Post, the City of Longmont, the City of Lakewood, and over a dozen resident groups throughout the Front Range who are working on Metro District reform. Gary Grieser, his career spanned 45 years in the food industry, 32 years at a director level, specializing in purchasing, manufacturing, warehousing, information systems, and document management. Since moving to Solterra in 2010, Gary has been active in FRMD and was a board candidate in 2018. His skill sets include certifications in project management, process improvement, applied financial analysis, activity-based costing, and purchasing. JD, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Linnea. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time. I'll be your MC and facilitating a little bit here. A few ground rules. As Linnea said, we have an hour to go over 2 presentations. At the end of each presentation, we'll open it up for a 10-minute Q&A to speak specifically, hopefully, about the material that was presented in that short time. So please be respectful that we will stick to the topic of those 10 minutes. If it is not in the spirit of those presentations, we will ask you to hold off, and I will cut you off and we'll take it to the end of the last presentation where we'll open it up for more back and forth conversations. If you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. For those of you who do not know how to use that, I'm going to show you exactly where that is in your screen. So I'm sharing right now just a Word document that kind of shows you on your Zoom client, you have the participants area. If you select that, it will bring up this area, which you can then raise your hand. Once you raise your hand, I'll be able to see that you have a question or a comment, and I will ask or call on you. And at that point in time, you'll be able to unmute and speak your question. If you're on the phone and you're just doing a call-in, it's *9 to raise your hand, and the same will apply after that. If you do not want to speak, but you have some questions, and I understand there are people that don't want to do that, feel free to go ahead and use the chat function, and I will go ahead and ask your question or present your comment for you. I believe that is all that I want to do. Reminder that if you are doing a question during the presentation time, since it is only 10 minutes, please be respectful to stay within a 2-minute time frame, and any questions that we don't get to in that slot will carry over to the next Q&A, and then of course at the end. We did this on Thursday and we stayed a lot longer. We'd like to give back the time to everybody because it is a Saturday. So know that this is the second of what we hope is many conversations. We would love to be doing this in person, obviously. However, we are using technology the best that we can. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our first presenter. John will present for you. Thank you.
Thanks, JD. Thank you, Linnea. Good morning, everyone. We have an opportunity to save $500,000 per year for at least 30 years. $500,000. That's a quarter of the debt that we're paying on the Brookfield bonds. Question is, what are we going to do with that money? There are lots of options, right? We can save the money for Solterra, invested in what will likely be multi-million-dollar projects in the next 10, 15 years that we're not saving for now. Another option is to reduce our taxes, put the money back in our pockets. We could do a combination of the two. We could save some taxes, we could spend some money on Solterra. The board, with 3 days' notice, is proposing and has already decided to issue more bonds to pay Brookfield another $10 million. Under the Colorado Constitution, that's our decision. That's a decision that belongs to the voters. This is one of the most insidious areas of Metro District abuse, and that's what I want to spend about the next 9 minutes talking about. How did we lose our right to vote on whether or not to issue more tax bond debt and pay Brookfield another $10 million? How did we lose our right to vote on that? Because in the city, at the county level, at the state level, the city, the county, the state can't do that unless they put it to a vote. We had recent examples of that in Jefferson County and Lakewood over the last couple of years, where they wanted to keep the money, the extra money that they obtained when they taxed us. And they had to go to a vote. They had to get a vote of the residents in order to do that. Same thing here. In Ken Carlisle, just down the road, a district where, coincidentally, the attorney for Brookfield, who is threatening to sue us, that's where she lives, and they have the right to vote. They don't issue bonds unless it goes to a vote of all the residents. So how did we lose our right? There are a series of documents I'd like to share with you, and I'm a little awkward at this, so bear with me. The first document I'm going to share with you is the ballot issue. There it is, blow it up in all of its glory. You never saw this when you closed on your home. The city of Lakewood never saw this when they initially approved setting up a special district. Nobody sees this document, and for good reason. It's long, it's single-spaced, all caps, legal language that even attorneys have a difficult time understanding. But this is the first page. And what you see is that 8 people in 2006, 8 people voted to take away my right and your right to vote on taxes and future bond debt. And they voted on all these ballot issues, and you can see the vote was unanimous, 8-0, 8-0. Well, who were these 8 people? These 8 people were employees of Brookfield. Employees of Brookfield. They didn't live here, didn't pay any taxes, didn't own any property. They worked for Brookfield. And they voted in 2006 in a legal election on a ballot issue to take away our right to vote. And here's the language. This is an excerpt from one of those ballot issues, and it's just a sample. The pages are 4 or 5 times as long, single spaced, but here's the key language. You see just above the red box, they voted to raise these fees or authorize the raising of all these fees through taxes and bonds. And the key language is right above the red line, these decisions will, quote, constitute a voter-approved revenue change, collection, and retention. Next line, spent by the district. And what they mean there is the district board. And in another document, pull that up. Oh, sorry. Here's the same document, the full text. And I'm sorry, I don't have this block, but it's roughly, it's roughly in the center of the page. These amounts, without limitation, shall be determined by the district board of directors. So that's how they did it. And they knew that the residents had the right to vote. And when they issued the bonds, they told the bond investors the residents had the right to vote in the bond prospectus. And this is the same document that the board is currently they've currently voted to have prepared. It'll cost somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 to have the attorneys and bond counsel prepare this document to pay Brookfield $10 million. And this is the first page of it. This is the one that was issued prior to the recall in 2016. And in that document, they tell the bond investors about Tabor and about our constitutional right. And there at the bottom in the block, it says, required elections. There are statutory provisions which, quote, require voter approval prior to issuing any of these debts. They go on to say, the voters already approved this, and they're very happy about spending or going into debt, in this case, $12 million, and what they're proposing, another 10. And here's what they say. At the 2006 election, the electors voted to approve this indebtedness. And what is the authorized limit that they voted for in those bonds? When you add up all of those bond issues that were voted to be approved 8-0, what does that all add up to? Well, there it is, black and white, in the legal prospectus prepared by bond counsel to the bond investors. Count the zeros, $4.9 billion. So those 8 employees of Brookfield gave the board authority to issue tax debt, bond debt, the total repayment cost of which can be up to, and this is the authorization, $4.9 billion. And they went on to say the voters voted for this. The voters want this. But what they don't say, what is missing from this bond, is that those 8 people who voted for it were employees of Brookfield and had a conflict of interest. So we want our right to vote back. And how do we get it? We get the right to vote back by simply, very simply, putting up another ballot issue. They had a ballot issue in 2006, and 8 people voted to give that authority to the board. And of course, incidentally, for the next 11 years, the board was Brookfield, because Brookfield actively suppressed participation by the residents. We're done with that. We now have a resident board, but we still don't have our right to vote on future tax debt. And we want that right back. So all we have to do is put it on a ballot and say, yes or no. Do you want your right to vote back? Do you want to repeal what 8 people voted on back in 2006 who were employees of Brookfield? And if we repeal what they did in 2006, then the constitutional right that we all have in the city, county, and state is returned to us. And then we decide whether or not we want to issue bonds, or do we want to keep that money for Solterra, or do we want to keep that money and reduce our taxes? And there's no rush, right? I mean, we can refinance. We'll get the $500,000 a year for the next at least 30 years. There's no rush. We can spend the next however many months talking about this as a community. This is a big deal. This is a big decision for our community. And we can decide how we want to use that money. And if, after we've debated the issue, there's people want to pay Brookfield $10 million and other people don't, and other people want to have a independent forensic financial audit so we can be more informed as citizens about whether or not we want to do this. But after we do all of that, after we have that discussion, after we have that debate, then we can put it to a vote of the community, just like we have in the city of Lakewood and Jefferson County, and just like they do just down the road in Ken Carlisle. Let's put it to a vote and decide what we want to do. Somebody asked on Thursday, and JD, I lost track of the time, so let me know how I'm doing.
You're over, but go right ahead.
Okay, well, somebody asked at the last meeting, I don't quite understand how the bonds work. And I said, well, you follow the money in the budget. And here is what that looks like. I'm sorry about this. Okay, so here's the Fossil Ridge budget for 2018, District 3. In 2016, District 3 is the one that issued that bond that I just showed you a little while ago. And in the very top in the budget, this is the budget, it shows those bonds were sold and a check was deposited in the District 3 account for $12.5 million. Bonds are sold, $12.5 million in the pot. The very next line shows the expenditure. That $12.5 million is immediately transferred to District 1. I apologize. Here's District 1's budget. The second block, transfer from District 3. They got that $12.5 million from District 3. And what did they do with it? The bottom line, repay developer principal and interest. They turned right around and wrote that check for $12.5 million to Brookfield. I don't want my future. I don't want how I decide to spend that money. I don't want my taxes and my spending to be decided by 8 employees of Brookfield in 2006. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I don't see any questions, but I'll ask a couple because I think they're kind of rhetorical at some point. So maybe anybody can address, and maybe this will get some more conversations coming from the board members who I do see on the call, which is great. Why do you think that the board does not want to have a vote?
You know, JD, that's a great question. It came up last time. We had a really robust discussion about it. I have my, personal thoughts about it. I think the only way I can really answer that question is to go back to Brookfield, because Brookfield's really driving this. When we had the mediation sessions with Brookfield back in 2017, where they worked with the mayor and other folks to have these sessions to try to persuade us to withdraw the petition so they could issue more bonds. I asked that question. I said, why won't you return the vote to the residents? In other words, why won't you, Brookfield, resign your employees from our boards and let's figure out who owes what and pay it? Because everybody I talked to when I was knocking on doors in 2017 said the same thing. And I say the same thing. If we owe the money, let's pay it. But we need an independent financial forensic audit to figure that out. We can't rely on Brookfield. There are a lot of reasons why, and I could go into detail there, but here's what he said. And these are his words. This is the attorney for Brookfield, eyeball to eyeball in a room with about 7 people, including Adam Paul and Barb Franks. We don't believe the residents will do the right thing. We don't trust the residents to know how to make decisions. We have to do it for them.
So I have a couple more for you, John, since I don't see any questions in here yet. Another one is, what does the board say, and what have they said in any conversations about why we won't get the right to vote? Do you have a feeling or any idea as to maybe it's because as our electorate, they're the ones who should be speaking on behalf, and so therefore they shouldn't need to have any other conversations, or they're not obligated to do so by law, or any other possible rationale?
The argument has been made by the supporters. We haven't really heard from the board because they don't, unfortunately, engage us. They won't engage us in conversation at the meetings. But they've made the argument that, hey, we're elected and you should basically let us make decisions for you and not question those decisions. because you elected us. Well, that's not how I grew up with my understanding of representative government. Clearly, we want to elect good people who we think will be thoughtful and make good decisions. But one of the most important things for me has always been, and you know, this goes way back, more than 40 years. The one thing that's always been important to me is that you elect people who will listen. Because no one of us, not me, not anyone on the call, no one of us has all the answers. We don't know and don't have infinite wisdom. And that's the beauty of how we do things here in this country. We listen. We talk to each other. We debate the issue. We had a wonderful debate on Thursday night between one of the gentlemen who is close to the board and was arguing the other side of these issues. And it was great. I mean, it was really, really good. It was healthy. And what I want in representatives is somebody who will listen and then take, you know, the truth and the what appears to be the consensus of the community and move forward and act on that. And I thought, you know, after the recall, and we had the residents board, even though they were appointed initially, we had a tremendous amount of optimism. And on this specific point, the board went so far as to find and invite to a meeting, and we had at least one meeting with them, it may have been two, a group of people who would do a forensic financial independent audit of all of the finances and get to the bottom line. And we went a couple meetings and then it just dropped. And every time I asked, I raised it, I said, well, you know, what's going on with this? And they say, well, we're still thinking about it. Or we're going to do some stuff in-house first. Or, I mean, there was always an excuse. And that's been, what, 3.5 years now. But I'm sorry, I digress. But getting back to your point, this is all about, right now, this is all about getting back our right to vote. And I just don't think there's any good explanation for not doing that. And here's you know, we're having this debate and the board, while we're having this meeting on Thursday, in the middle of it, they sent out a statement and I responded to it last night. But what was really interesting about that is, you know, they were, whoever wrote it, it's anonymous and I don't know whether they're an attorney or not, but they threw out this thing. They said, well, you know, we have pre-authorization date and we have post-authorization date debt. And what they're getting at there is that the authorization that those 8 people voted on and gave basically a credit card to future boards, which were Brookfield the first 11 years, they gave a credit card with a limit, an authorization limit, $4.9 billion. And that's really not much of a limit, is it? But anyway, the point is, that had an expiration. We, even if we didn't get the right to vote back in the next couple months, even if we didn't get that right to vote back, it expires in 2027 or after we spend $4.9 billion. The board knows this. The board knows that this right that they inherited from Brookfield and should have been returned to us as soon as they got it. They know that this right that they have expires, it dies on the vine. So why do they insist on keeping it between now and 2027? I don't know, other than, I mean, I have a question. They say we learned from Mr. Mickelson at the last board meeting or at the last budget work session, that Brookfield's been threatening to sue us for the last 4 years. We haven't seen anything about that. We haven't seen the documents. But have they reached a deal with Brookfield and they feel obliged to go through with this and just kind of push it through? I mean, I don't know. We don't have enough information on that. But the bottom line is we all win. Everybody wins if we get the right to vote back. And sorry for the long answer.
It's okay. Great. Thank you. Since there's no questions, we'll move next to Gary's presentation. And then after that, we can have some more conversations if you'd like to. If not, we will end early. Just a note, you can always type your question in the chat box if you'd like to do that as well.
So JD, thank you. Linnea, thank you. And John, thank you. And also thank those this morning that are on the call or the town hall with us today. We appreciate the time that you're devoting. I've lived in Solterra for close to 10 years, and I've always been active in the Fossil Ridge Metro District. And from the beginning, I've spent many hours and to understand the financial health through documents posted on Solterra Connect, the board packets, and the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. I've always tried to attend all the board meetings and the financial workshops when announced. I have put together and maintained several spreadsheets on budgets, bonds, and taxes, and I've shared at times some of those with the financial committee just to try to gain more insight. I've asked many questions over the years with regard to the bonds and the payment that we believe belongs to Brookfield. Most remained unanswered. So I am not an expert. I would appeal to the board to share information to the community with what I plan to share right now. So let's get right through this. The first area is the current bonds. First three bullets basically talk about the current bonds. I think most of you are probably aware. The fourth line really talks about where we're at today, 27 million in remaining principal, but 52 million in the P&I. The initial principal of the bonds was around 29,480,000. So we're now at 27.3 million or 27,395,000 per what the board just recently communicated. So we've reduced it by a little over 2 million. And so we paid 9 million and almost 9.5 million in interest. What does it really mean to refinance at 3.5, the remaining principal right now? The Finance Committee member shared on August 3rd at the virtual meeting of Fossil Ridge Board that financing of the current bonds look to favor a coupon rate around 3.5. So the rate's not final, but given the current low interest rates available, it appears that it's achievable. What does that mean for 30 years? That means that it's about 44 million in P&I, about 1.5 million per year, with a savings of 8 million over what we have today. Now, if we went to 40 years, it is 51 million in P&I and 1.2 million a year, savings of 1.4. So the board has not shared if it's a 30 or 40-year approach, but clearly, in my mind, the 30-year option is more prudent. It saves the community 6.6 million in less interest payment. I know what I would do as a fiscal responsible owner with my own mortgage. So if 10 million is paid to Brookfield, I understand the residents may not see a change in their annual tax based on just Fossil Ridge Metro District, but what will come if the board pursues additional payment? Not unlike what John was talking about. We only know about 10 million right now. What's going to happen before it expires in 2020? So could that be the basis for leveraging 40 years that hasn't been divulged yet to suggest that residents are not going to see their taxes increase? No, but it runs on forever. We're going to pay interest forever if we keep doing this. So what does it mean? It's just a simple compare. So the 2020 P&I right now, the current bonds is close to 2 million. If it's refinanced for 30 years, as I mentioned previously, it would be around 1,489,000, a reduction of 510,000. We go to 40 years, again, you can save an annual reduction of 717, but again, we pay 6,628,000. So I applaud the board's commitment to refinancing the current bonds because it does provide an excellent opportunity to reinvest in this community because we know maintenance is going up. We just know it's coming. But I want to emphasize that while we try to talk about getting our vote back, the ability for residents to vote on debt, under Tabor, there is no need for a resident vote to refinance at a lower rate. So we would urge the board to leverage this opportunity separately and defer the discussion on the additional payment. Don't put burden by saying what we're doing as the Solterra Community Network is jeopardizing your opportunity to refinance. In fact, you have the opportunity. You just don't need any vote just to lower the rate on the active bonds. I want to bring up the reserve study, which communicates maintenance. The board took an excellent step, in my view, back in 2019 to commission a reserve study. It's important that we do understand what's coming because this community is aging. It was completed in December of 2019 and it projects liability for many, many years to come. It is an excellent report. It's available in Solterra Connect, the district and the reserve study. That's the drop down. It's about 153 pages. Most of it's visual, but if you focus on the beginning pages, the ending pages, you'll really understand what we're up against as a community. We are now being assessed around $80 a quarter to build a reserve fund. That amounts to about $374,000 in 2020. Aspen Reserve Specialties, the company that was contracted the study, they're recommending $1.7 million. So we're far short of that. Can we leverage savings from the bond refinancing? If so, we might be able to meet this deficit in less than 3 years. And the scope of the study does not address sewer pipes, and it doesn't address what I've seen, the water rock feature on the tributary, because many of us know that area is going to require much attention. We know it hasn't been given off yet to Fossil Ridge or Lakewood, but it needs attention now. And so while bonds are debt obligation to residents, quarter fees to maintain Solterra operation needs comes from the same pockets. It would be beneficial if the board would just project what their expectation is of overall expense, at least for the next 5 years. So we understand, if we go down the route of 10 billion or 10 million more in debt, what's going to happen to our expenses? Because that's a separate bucket. Regional improvements. I bring this one up because in metro districts, they're kind of unique. They have public improvements and regional improvements. Publics are inside the boundary. So the things that happen inside of Solterra, regional are more outside. Projects such as C470 and Alameda Interchange and the Alameda Parkway to Bear Creek Boulevard, Water, McIntyre, Yale, they were all identified in the service plan as regional improvements. The service plan projected $29 million as the cost for which Fossil Ridge Metro District would be the source of funds. But it also stated that Fossil Ridge would be limited to around $10.5 million. And what does that mean? That means, well, hopefully someday we get reimbursed. If we're the source of the funds, do we ever get the difference back? So regional improvements is really a convenient way for developers and municipalities to fund improvements on the backs of single communities such as Solterra. So the difference of a little over 18 million is to be reimbursed to Fossil Ridge. Now I've asked this question many times of the financial committee and the board about what's going on with the reimbursement. I've never had an answer. I think that's important to get an answer when we start talking about how does it impact the $10 million payment to Brookfield. I think it's absolutely important that we understand, are we ever going to get this 18, 19 million back? As far as the general obligation debt, per the Colorado Revised Statute, section 32.1101, there's language in the statute that extends cautions to special districts to go beyond 50% for their debt to assessed value using property taxes as the source to pay back. Solterra is currently at 44%. That's based on the latest audit that was posted here a few weeks ago or a couple months ago. 27,395,000 in debt to 62 million assessed value. If we add another 10 million, It's going to increase our debt to our ratio to 60%. And we've heard different numbers of what might be owed to Brookfield. If we add 30 million, it's 92%. Back in 2018, and this discussion came up before, when we were over 50% because our assessed value for the community was lower, a member of the Finance Committee stated limiting to 50% was a good place to stop borrowing, as to go beyond is risky. So I'm trying to understand and anticipate what is the strategy, adding 10 million or more, because when you look at the Solterra max build out, it's around 1,342 homes. We're about 1163 today. So we got 179 more. So that's only gonna, if we were to give $10 million, it's gonna, maybe will be around 55%. But if we do 30 million, it's gonna be 79%. So I hope the board will address what cautions they're taking to keep the financial health of Solterra while pursuing 10 million additional debt or even beyond. It is concerning. So what do the residents consider? It's excellent that we can save $500,000 a year and reduce interest payments. So, but what are the options? Should it be paid? Should it be used to fund additional payment to Brookfield? $10 million? Can we leverage the funds in community maintenance, perhaps lower fees? Should the savings go back to the residents? And as a reminder, and I think we've heard it, the decision to add debt should be the residents. It's a Colorado constitutional right under Tabor. Letting the residents decide does not suggest a lack of trust in our board. It's our right. We do it for ballot measures such as school, transportation, fire districts, etc. We have the right electing government officials. It does not mean they're our proxy. We delegate all these tax increase decisions. So what is Brookfield owed? 10 million, 30 million, 60 million, 91, 150? I think some of you have probably heard all these numbers in the last few years. And so to me, should the board conduct independent forensic audit so that once and for all, we really understand what is owed? And I go back to John's point, we get the information, we're going to do the right thing as a community. If we owe Brookfield, we owe one. So the Brookfield decision to take Ware right in 2006 should not interfere with our current board's trust of the residents to make the proper decision once all of us understand what is really owed. So please consider a ballot measure to give the right back. This is kind of a high level about the property tax obligation. What does it mean if we only refinanced and we reduced property tax to residents based on that? So on the assessed value in the posted budget for 2020, it's a little over 62 million. The property taxes that was submitted to Jefferson County on the tax levy is 2.7 million. I can only attribute about 2 million of that to P&I of active bonds. That means there's some $736,000 in additional burden. I think on the tax levy, it says contracted obligation, and I think that's what it says. So that means our mill levy is 43. What I tried to do here on the right side, on the what if we dropped the 510,000, that basically is a 19% reduction in our property. That impact on a weighted basis about 19%. So that means potentially the mill levy could go to 35.53. And if you look at the grid below, it kind of tells you what it means on appraised house and assessed value. So, maybe in the scheme of things as a resident, if I knew, I'd love to see this money reinvested in reduction of fees rather than going to Brookfield initially. So, and lastly, I just wanted to, on the town hall that we had Thursday, some questions came up about people hearing that is Solterra the most highly taxed on metro districts in Jefferson County. So there's all kinds of speculation out there. This is kind of a small insight to what's going on right now in Jefferson County. So this is a compare of the neighborhood mill levy with 500 plus homes in Jefferson County. You probably have heard of Candless and Layden Rock. Their full mill levy, is higher than Solterra, at least Layden Rock is, but their mill levy for metro districts is lower when you consider that the burden Solterra has is 2 metro districts. So Mount Carbon was the burden put on Solterra based on the bankruptcy that Karma agreed to in bankruptcy court many, many years ago. So I think we got to get away from just thinking we have 1 metro district here. Whether it goes to 50 or whatever for Fossil Ridge, we have 2 metro districts that we're paying for in Solterra. And the interesting thing is that, so Candela, Solterra, the highest in mill levy communities for over 500 homes, but Solterra has a higher mill levy for metro district. 42% of our taxes goes to metro districts. The average full mill levy for neighborhoods in Jefferson County is 94 for the 500 plus homes. It's even lower when you go below 500 homes. So that is 61 less for Solterra. It shows you how we're burdened with the metro district. And I want to remind people, it's not, what we're asking for it isn't that unusual. Ken Carl Ranch, and I know it's been around for years, the mill levy for this metro district is 21. Its full mill levy is 106. The residents have the right to vote on debt in Ken Carroll. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. We have a shy group where everybody's just inundated with the information, which either way is okay. These are recorded, so you can go back and watch these at any point in time. I will put them up on Nextdoor, and I'll put them out as links on our Facebook Solterra. I did have a question, something that I was thinking about as John kind of alluded to the phrase, there is no rush. I love your creative approach to separating the refinancing with the additional debt of 10 million. What do you think the board would say to that? Anyone, maybe it doesn't have to be Gary.
Okay, is that a question to you, John, or me?
Either or.
Okay, I can start. I think it's an obvious solution. I mean, we really have to look at this in very practical terms. We have a wonderful opportunity, unfortunately, as a result of tragedy, health-wise and economy-wise, but you know, it creates an opportunity. And just as we might refinance our mortgage, we've got this debt that Brookfield imposed on us when they ran the boards and they voted as the board to impose this debt. So we're stuck with it for right now. And we have a great opportunity to reduce it and save 25% of our debt. We're paying a little over $2 million, you know, give or take, but around $2 million a year just on Brookfield debt. And we can reduce it to 150 or 1.5 million and save $500,000. Now think about that. That's $500,000 every year for at least 30 years that we can save. And there is absolutely no reason to rush in and say, we're going to save 500,000, and we're immediately in the same breath that we execute the documents to save that money by refinancing, in the same breath, we're going to spend it on Brookfield. I mean, even if we ultimately decided as a community that that's the best thing, why? There's no rush. There's no rush. And so I think, you know, I think it rises to the level, you know, one of the residents Thursday said, you know, there's a real gap here between the residents and the board. And the board owes us a duty of loyalty, a fiduciary duty. And I think this rises to the level of a fiduciary duty. It is irresponsible. No one of us here on this call would refinance our house without thinking about it, and with only 3 days notice, would refinance our house and immediately spend all of the savings on the refinance to spend on somebody else. We wouldn't do that as reasonable people. We would think about it, we'd talk about it. So anyway, sorry to keep going.
I have a question. The question of whether what we would do with the 500,000 we save by refinancing, that's a brilliant plan, and I applaud the board for making that proposal. I have a lot of concern about future maintenance of Solterra, and future maintenance of Solterra is closely tied to maintaining our property values. The tributary is a problem. It's a big problem, a big expensive problem. We only have one swimming pool, and I'm not going to go there because that's a whole different discussion. But there are so many things that need attention in Solterra. And so the idea of giving any amount of money to Brookfield when we need those funds here to make our community stronger, better, more valuable, a higher quality of place to live, it's a no-brainer. Thanks.
I'm curious. My curious mind tends to go places, but I'm curious. The response that maybe there is a rush, there is a need. Could it be that Brookfield is pressuring us to pay them what perhaps we do owe? I don't know. Haven't seen anything. And that is why the board is trying to refinance and accumulate this additional debt? Is that a possibility?
It certainly is. I mean, they were sitting on us real hard in 2017, trying to get us to back away from the recall. And they pulled out all the stops. They got Mayor Paul in there, Barb Franks, and Mayor Paul was pushing us real hard, said, you know, this is what you need to do. So I have no doubt that every chance Brookfield gets, they've been pushing on the board. But, you know, there hasn't been much transparency there. Brookfield knows more about what's going on than we do, and yet we're the ones that are going to get the bill. So I think we need to frame the conversation in terms of who has the burden. Brookfield wants money. Brookfield has the burden, the monkey's on their back, to prove to us that we owe it. We've seen what they've done through Guy Ford, and we ain't buying that. So if they want their money, then they will work with us to have an independent forensic financial audit. And the simple fact of the matter is, because the monkey's on their back, because it's their burden, if they don't cooperate, they're not going to get any money. It's just that simple. So I think we need to frame this differently in terms of not assuming that we have to do anything, because we don't. We really don't. And, you know, we can talk about the legal issues and what litigation would look like if they sued us. But the bottom line is, this has been dragging on for a long time. I think everybody, Brookfield, the board, the residents, want resolution. We're offering a way to resolve all of this. But there are going to be some ground rules. Number one, the residents are going to make the decision in a vote, like they have city, county, Ken Carlisle. I mean, that last line in Gary's wonderful analysis speaks volumes. Ken Carlisle has the right to vote. That is the check and balance. They have the right to vote. And the result is they have less mill rate than we do. They have less debt than we do, because they have the right to vote. So that first ground rule is get the right to vote. The second thing is, let's take some time. Let's have a debate about this issue back and forth and figure it out. And after we figure it out, then let's vote on it and move forward. If we all have the right to vote, we will all make the right decision.
I just have one more, and I don't think we have any other questions, and then Linnea can wrap it up. I've heard some residents talk about, and it seems to me, this fear of litigation, this fear of pitting residents against residents, and this fear that we're going to be spending so much money trying to win this case or, get this big behemoth off our backs. What can we say to that?
Well, the easy answer is this. Mr. Mickelson disclosed for the first time that the board is looking at a forecast from our attorney that it would be $500,000 if Brookfield sued us. I don't think they're going to risk going to court. They could sue us, but they're not going to risk going the distance on this because it will expose them to formal discovery through the court of all of their finances. They don't want to do that, I don't think. They also risk losing a significant legal issue on these agreements that they rely on, these single party agreements. They don't want a judge deciding whether those are legal agreements. So I don't think they'll go the distance, but let's say they sue us. And it costs $500,000 to do that. If the board has already decided, and in their mind, they're already prepared to spend $500,000 a year paying that money to Brookfield, let's pay it to the attorney for the first year, or even 2. I don't think it's going to cost that much. I've litigated big cases, and that's a big number, and I don't think it's going to cost that much. But even if it did, let's spend the $500,000 on our attorney in the, I think, reasonable likelihood that we're going to save 10 million or 30 million or 60 million or 90 million, whatever the number is. They've already spent that money and given it to Brookfield anyway. Let's give it to the attorney and let's see what the result is. And I think that we're going to be very happy with the result. So they're already spending $500,000. They've already committed and given that to Brookfield. We lose nothing. We have nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. We spend no money that we aren't already given to Brookfield. We spend nothing. We have nothing to lose if we pay that to the attorney. And with all due respect to Brookfield, either put up or shut up.
Excellent. Linnea, we did have a last minute question, if it's okay if we get that one in first. So
Let's go a minute over.
Good morning, everybody. I've just got a couple of comments. Number one, it's like Thursday, we had maybe 30 people on this call. Now we have 19 or 20. And it just seems odd to me that we've got almost 1,200 residents and like 2% participation in this. Are people not getting the message? They don't care, they don't understand. How do we get more people involved? And I know nobody has an answer to that. I'm just pointing that out. Number two, this whole thing about this additional $10 million. My wife keeps asking me, what are they going to do with that $10 million? And after listening to this, I can't explain it to her. All I hear is we're giving $10 million to Brookfield. Can somebody explain in detail where that money's really going? Is it paying down principal? Or what are we doing? I don't understand. We're giving Brookfield $10 million. Can somebody please explain that?
I think the answer is that the board, our board members are the only ones that can explain that. John, did I take your spot?
Yeah, well, no, That's certainly the first answer. Here's the challenge, and this is part of the frustration that we've had the last 4 years. That number keeps changing. That is, what is Brookfield owed for money they say they spent on building our infrastructure? The long and the short of it is the traditional way to finance infrastructure is through the cost of the lot. I think we already paid that. But what Brookfield is saying is, well, we paid, and here the number changes. They first told the city of Lakewood, we're going to build the infrastructure and it's going to cost $37 million. And then in April of 2017, Brookfield told us, no, it cost $160 million. They just make the numbers up. And when they said, well, we asked, well, what did the $29 million go to pay for? And when I was sitting next to one of Brookfield's attorneys at this meeting with the mayor, and they were trying to talk us out of the recall, I asked her, I turned to her, she's sitting right next to me. I said, you know, I'm still trying to figure all this out. What did you do with the $29 million? What did you guys spend it on? And I'm not extrapolating, I'm not paraphrasing at all. She looked at me dead eye and she said, we are still trying to figure that out. This is 2017. They did all this in 2006 and 2007. The number keeps changing, and that's one reason we need an independent forensic audit. So you're right, you know, you and your wife, it's a great question. We've been asking it for 4 years, and they still haven't answered that question. But going back to your first point, and this is really important, we do have some experience with what we're doing right now. We did the same thing. We thankfully were able to do it in person in 2017, where we had a town hall just like this, you know, the one we did Thursday and the one this morning. And we had basically the same number of people join us in that town hall in 2017. We then kept talking to people, and we put together a committee of 26 residents, many of whom are on this call, or several of whom are on this call, 26 residents. And those residents, including us, knocked on doors and got signatures. Now, the logistics are going to be different because of the pandemic. But the bottom line is, from the meeting that started just like this, gathering a group of people to work on it, getting the signatures, the result of that effort that started just like this was 749 signatures that were many more sufficient than we needed to recall the board. And as a result of that effort, Brookfield tucked tail, left, and we got all residents on the board. So we're tracking our experience before, and yeah, we'd like 100 or 200, but this is a good start. And thanks for being here.
Are there any other questions?
I want to add one more thing, Linnea, if I can.
Okay.
To go. I appreciate everybody staying. You bring up a very, very valid and important point, Don, about 2% here, 1/3 of our representation on our elections for our board, our current board in May. That has been the biggest problem I think this community has had, is we don't have majority representation in our community. So I put it to everybody on this call. I put it to everybody in the community. I put it to everyone to become involved, right? We're not saying that we have all the answers. I think John alluded to that. We're not saying even that what we're presenting is accurately correct of what we need to do. It's an option. There's things to do. What we are trying to get is more people involved that aren't, they just don't know. They're clueless as to what's going on. So
Yeah, I mean, I would be concerned if we recall the board, are we going to even find enough people that are interested and qualified to create a new board?
That won't be a problem.
Well,
With this many people, well-educated, experienced professionals, no, that will not be a problem. But I will not be running.
So Don, you bring up a good point in that, do we ignore the problems of today because of a fear that we won't have representation tomorrow? I argue no. And I argue that if we get out under the auspices of Brookfield, we will get concerned citizens and concerned residents together. And hopefully it will be with those in power now, because we need everybody talking together. I don't believe that's going to be a problem.
And just to add to that, this group will stay focused on our objective, and we welcome new people to join. And you can reach out to any one of us or reply to the email that you received from us to let us know of your interest in helping. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to stay true to our word that this meeting would last about an hour and wrap it up. Thank you, John. Thank you, Gary, for your very well-researched comments. Thank you to our participants for joining and listening, and hopefully thinking about what's going on and getting involved in the future. We hope you would further the discussion with your neighbors. Let us know what else you have questions about. And please remember, there's a board meeting this Monday, the 17th. Be sure to attend and bring your questions. We wish you a good day, and we wish the best for Solterra. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, everybody.